World War II was an apocalyptic cataclysm that left our world broken, scarred forever. But what if it had never happened? How would our world today be different? And just how much did World War II change the course of the 20th century? Let's find out. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires have all collapsed. The treaty is about to be signed in Versailles, but then suddenly a bolt from the blue, an assassin's bullet, changes history. Archduke Franz Ferdinand lives to fight another day, but unlike our own timeline, the seeds of World War II were never sown. In fact, Italy remains under Mussolini for quite a while. Japan does manage to occupy large parts of China and Korea, but it never faces total resistance from the US and the USSR. But fascism never spreads beyond its borders. Mussolini's brand of fascism was heavily influenced by German romantic nationalism, which doesn't exist here. But without the wartime mobilization, the recovery is a lot slower. Technology advances more incrementally. Commercial jet aircraft and sophisticated computers are decades away. In short, the interwar period plays out very differently, but it's not clear which version is better. The seeds of World War II have been removed, but we're not yet at peace just yet. But without the impetus of World War II, it faces determined resistance, but nothing on the scale of total war. Korea remains occupied by Japan until the late 1950s or even the 1960s. The Suez Crisis still happens in 1956, but without World War II, it's Britain's first major loss of international prestige and the last hurrah of the British Empire. The Cold War is more ideological and economic than military. No Cold War means no space race, and thus a slower development of rocketry and satellites. India is still independent, but perhaps as late as the early 1960s. It comes after long negotiations and considerable international pressure. The movement still happens, but starts in the 1960s instead of the 1950s. Perhaps Nigeria and South Africa gain independence in the 1960s, but most others follow in the 1980s or later. Global governance is also very fragmented. No Organização do Tratado do Atlântico Norte, no WTO, regional blocs dominate. The People's Republic could lose power quickly, or perhaps never come to power at all. Technology is perhaps 10 to 20 years behind the real world, 2000s, but atomic energy becomes a dominant power source. In fact, nuclear fusion may be achieved earlier, as the scientific community is not split between weapons and energy research. The Marshall Plan and the urgency of World War II. There is no EU or Eurozone, but rather a patchwork of sometimes rival states. The US is still a powerful economy, but less dominant geopolitically. Europe is still struggling to integrate, but Brexit hasn't happened. The UK has not become a minor power. The internet and personal computing still emerge, but later and slower. This leads to economic stagnation compared to the booming younger populations of Asia and Africa. The international norms established in the aftermath of World War II prevented such violence, but without those norms, many places see violent struggles for independence. Global governance is weak, but maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe the Iranian Revolution doesn't happen, but who knows? Mobile phones are common, but are mostly limited to voice calls. No Sputnik or Apollo missions, as there's no space race. Technology is less advanced, but the world may be more stable geopolitically with fewer weapons of mass destruction. There is a global economic boom, but it's uneven. Japan, having not been leveled by nuclear weapons, remains a major regional power, but its empire is in decline. Korea is still under Japanese rule, or in a complex transitional state. Latin America is still poor and divided, but this time without the Cold War divisions. Africa is a mix of developed, stable democracies and fragile states. It depends on exactly how each country's independence struggle played out. Satellites and rocketry develop gradually through civilian efforts. Nuclear weapons are theoretically possible but not developed. The Manhattan Project is cancelled as there's no looming threat of Nazi Germany. Atomic research is focused primarily on energy. So Italian fascism is a lot less appealing. It's more like Southeast Asia's growth. In our timeline, a steady but less jarring climb up the economic ladder. Globalization is more regional and less American-led. European and Asian trade zones become more important. The Treaty of Versailles, a major point of tension in our timeline, is a lot less controversial. Furthermore, with no Holocaust, the Jewish communities of Europe largely remain intact. The Zionist movement continues, but without the urgency of the Holocaust. It lacks focus and gains less support worldwide. Israel is not created in 1948. No United Nations is formed, but various regional cooperation bodies emerge, such as a European Council for Trade and Peace. It's a bit of a missed opportunity for global governance. Germany pays some reparations and loses some territory, but is otherwise left intact. The point of tension that led to Hitler's rise to power simply doesn't exist. Germany becomes a struggling but democratic republic. As the Great Depression hits, the Weimar government struggles to survive. But somehow they manage. There is no Nazi party to take advantage of the situation. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more alternate history and future scenario content. Thanks for watching. The world is on the brink of war. The year is 1919. In our timeline, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip plunged Europe into World War I, which ultimately led to the Second World War. But what if he had lived? Well, as it turns out, nothing much would change. Ferdinand was only one small factor in a powder keg of tensions, and so, despite his survival, the war would rage on with little difference. By 1919, the war is over, and the peace treaties have been signed. Across Europe, the far right never gains power. There is no fascist Italy, no Vichy France, and no Nazi Germany. In Asia, Japan continues its expansionist campaign, but without the tipping point of Pearl Harbor, it never provokes the United States into action. And speaking of the US, it remains largely isolationist throughout the 1920s and 30s, largely focused on domestic issues. As the 1940s dawn, the world slowly begins to recover from both World War I and the Great Depression. Colonial empires across the globe remain strong. India, Algeria, Vietnam, Kenya, and many more remain under British, French, Dutch, and Portuguese rule. Japan continues its occupation of parts of China and Korea. And speaking of the 1960s, it's during this decade that we really start to see the effects of no World War II. During the 1950s, the US and USSR relations remain competitive but less hostile. Britain and France hold on to their empires longer. The civil rights movements in the US are delayed as African American veterans returning from the Second World War are ERD to push for change. As we move into the 1960s, a new era dawns. Africa's decolonization is fragmented and slower. Many countries remain colonies or protectorates. Into the 1970s, China may still undergo a communist revolution, but its outcome is uncertain without World War II weakening the nationalists. As the 1970s begin, the world looks very different. In the Middle East, tensions look very different. Without the creation of Israel, the Palestinian issue is less central, though Arab nationalism and oil politics still drive conflict. As the 1980s approach, we enter a new era of modernization. but it's on a different track. China rises economically through trade, but not as rapidly or dramatically as in our timeline. There is no Cold War-style arms race, so no need for nuclear. But as the 2000s arrive, the world is certainly not better off. Europe remains more fragmented without the EU-like integration. Decolonization has largely happened, but with greater violence and resistance. There are no war crimes trials such as Nuremberg, which means a slower development of international human rights law. Now, let's fast forward to our present day, the 2020s and beyond. The world is recognizable but different. The US is still a powerful economy, but its population has aged in the past decades. India is a rising power, having made impressive strides since independence. China is an economic powerhouse, though perhaps not the military superpower it is in our timeline. Perhaps there is a Pan-American Union, but no NAFTA or MER. The Middle East is still unstable and divided, but without Israel, the situation is less tense. The world is more multipolar than in our timeline. While the US remains a major player, it's challenged by multiple powers. What do you think? How different would the world be if World War II had never happened? Would it be better or worse? Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more alternate history and future scenario content.